Okay, let's get started. Welcome to our attendees for our second workshop. We're going to start with a disclaimer that the workshop is being recorded for reasons that are probably obvious to you all. This is for those who may not have been able to attend today, or if you want to review at another point. Today's workshop is highlighting your personal experiences and interests. Today's speakers are myself. I'm Charles Sentio, an associate professor at the Rutgers School of Communication and Information, and my colleague and teammate, Samir Patel, who is at the School of Computing at the University of Utah, Calhert. Did I say that correctly? Calhert. Okay, excellent. From the last session on the 11th, we covered the four major application components to a PhD application. Transcript and GRE, again, if applicable, resume or CV, personal statements, and letters of recommendation. And in this session, we're going to focus on two of the four components, the resume or CV and letters of recommendation. After this session, you'll be able to do four things. First, identify and list your research interests. Second, create a strong resume for graduate school admissions, specifically PhD admissions. Three, identify your strongest reference letter writers. And then last, anticipate what is required to submit a graduate school application. So with that, let's get started. First, identifying and listing your research interests. This one I want you to pay particular attention to because it can be a bit confusing for people at your stage. But the way we lay it out here, we think it should make things clearer for you. So what is a research area, topic, and question? A research topic is the subject that you're interested in investigating. And we'll have examples, or an example on the next slide. The area is a broader area in which the topic belongs or where it sits. And then a research question actually drives a specific investigation or study. It also can drive your research agenda. It's something that you want to know about your particular topic, something that you will explore and try to answer. And that can be for over several research projects, or it can be for one specific project. For example, a research area could be robotics. A research topic could be autonomous cars operating in an urban area or a city. And then a research question could be, how can we make autonomous cars more effective in the context of humans crossing the road? So as you can see in our inverted pyramid, we have our research area. Generally, those are pretty consistent over the course of for some cases, a career, but a period of time. Research topics, as you might imagine, based on the example that we've shared here, can shift a bit as technology advances and as our interests may advance. And then research questions can vary from project to project or be overarching. So we can have a research question guide a program of research. It's important to understand that research questions may shift as you continue your research study, but it's important to view your application as the current area, topic, and question that you are most interested in. We realize as reviewers of applications that students, particularly students who are just starting their research careers, may shift. Their interests may shift. Your interests may shift during your PhD. However, for your application, you should have a consistent message based on what you want to study and why. Understanding that your application is not a contract. No one will go back and review your personal statement to confirm if what you want to study after your dissertation is consistent necessarily with what you have in your application, but it is important to be focused in what your area topic and questions are for the application. So think of that as a moment in time of what your interests may be. As many of you are likely aware, computing researchers can pursue many different areas. This is a list of some, but not all, research areas. This is exhaustive, but not complete. So there are other research areas that you might be interested in. And there may be areas on here, most likely, of course, that you're not particularly interested in. But this gives you an idea of what computing researchers typically study. Now, narrowing your research interests. Here are some items that some points we'd like you to consider. Primarily, applying to graduate school requires quite a bit of reflection. And these questions may help you reflect as you try to narrow down what your interests are and articulate them in your application. First, which 1 to 3 general research areas are of most interest to you and why? It's important to narrow this down because simply stating that you're interested in research is too general for your readers to comprehend. A, do you understand what research is? And then B, what does it mean to you? And what are you trying to do with your training? So think about what sub-areas or topics within areas are most interesting to you and why. And the way I articulate this to students is, what do you read about or what are you curious about outside of class activities or work activities or lab activities? What kinds of questions are you interested in pursuing? The one common denominator that I have seen with researchers across different disciplines, and I was trained as an information scientist, I do work in public health, I do work in ethics and equity, but a common thread that runs through the researchers that I have seen and worked with is that we're curious people. We're curious about the world around us, and we have questions that we endeavor to answer. So think about what kinds of things are you excited about? What systems are you excited about developing, or algorithms? Or what kinds of experiments are you interested in? Are you interested in studying theory or theoretical or analytical foundations, running mathematical or statistical analysis? What type of work do you want to be doing? And for some of us and some students, it helps them think about this by articulating, at least to yourself or reflecting on, what kinds of problems do you want to try to solve? Next, creating a strong resume or CV. The terms resume and CV are often used interchangeably. Both should present, though, a summary of your work experience and academic background. Keep in mind as you prepare this and other materials for your PhD application that applications can be demanding of you and looking at yourself and reflecting on what you're interested in, but they should be comprehensive and to position you in the best light possible. So generally, resumes are typically 1 to 2 pages long, while CVs are a record of all your scholarly achievements and can span multiple pages, many pages. A strong resume or CV will do the following things. 1, highlight your research and work experiences. 2, describe your skills that you've learned, both hard and soft skills. 3, be succinct and use active verbs. Next, be stylistically consistent and easily scannable. And then last, use reverse chronological order. So the most current items should appear first. Keep in mind that the readers of your CV or resume will typically read many CVs and resumes in one sitting, and you want yours to be consistent with formats that readers expect to see, and we'll cover that in a minute. What's the difference between a resume for grad school applications and a resume for internships or jobs? The content is similar, but the objectives are different. What are the differences? Well, a grad school resume should enhance your application and describe your academic potential in your program of study. So think about how to best position yourself for graduate work, specifically doctoral work. So you want to describe your academic potential, what you've achieved already, in a relevant area. The order is also different. Again, the point here is to best position your application for competitive assessments. The readers want to know that you are a viable, a strong candidate for graduate school. So you should emphasize your academic preparation as well as your research experience. And research experience can be described in terms of research projects, say in a lab, working with a professor, as well as internships. Also, don't forget to include your personal website as well as GitHub repository if that's applicable. What goes on the resume? Your education or academic background, your research, internships, and employment, projects highlighting your technical competitions and awards, skills, your personal portfolio, and other activities. Now let's look at some examples for these sections. So education and academic background. You want to list each institution, degree, field or concentration, and date. Date that is expected or date where the degree was actually conferred. You might also want to add relevant courses. And we want to highlight here the layout from these two different CVs, but they share a couple of consistent characteristics, and we'll do this with each of our examples. First, there's a consistent header. Again, keep in mind that these will be reviewed, your resume will be reviewed amongst probably many others in one sitting. So you want to make it very easy for the reader to identify relevant information, like where did they go to school? When did they graduate? What institution did they go to, as I say? And then when did they graduate? These should be very apparent, very easy for the reader to discern. And what relevant coursework, what GPA do they have? And what relevant coursework have they taken? This kind of walks you through when we typically get a resume. What are we looking for? We're looking for where they went to school. When did they graduate, if they've graduated yet? What's their GPA? What coursework have they taken? Make that really easy for your readers to find. Similarly, in terms of research interests or research internships and employment, you want a description of the work that you've done, specific tasks and any leadership roles, what outcomes, so what came out of the work that you were involved with. Let's look at some examples here from our first example. The header, again, easy to find. Institution, where was this work done? Role, What role did the specific person have? Note that they are italicized and distinct, so it's easy to spot what role this particular person was involved with. The dates, again, important, beginning and end. And then, what impact did the work have? This is where, when I mentioned action verbs, action, designed, implemented. That's really important to have on your CV. Another example, same area, research experience. Very apparent to the reader. Institution or employer. Note here that we're actually suggesting that you list people or the PIs or your professor who you worked with, who led the lab, if you will. The world is very small. I told my students that today. It's a small world as you continue to develop. And your readers may know or know of some of these people. So put who they are. Who did you work with at the institution? Again, what role did you have? The dates of the work experience. And then, as we mentioned previously, what impact did you have or did the work have that you were involved with? Note the verbs, the action words. Train, collaborate, develop, record. Conducted literature review. Important to have action verbs in your descriptions. In terms of projects, presentations, technical competitions, and awards, we want to highlight your accomplishments. Remember, this is an application or this is for an application, and it's an important component of it. So what did you accomplish? What awards have you earned? And where might people have an idea of where they can see them or where they can get an understanding of what it is that you were involved with? Again, note the use of bold and caps and spacing. It's important that your reader can spot these items quickly. Also the dates, when, and other relevant information. For the awards section in this example, where were these awards granted? How much were they? What conferences, for example, were they presented at? I suggest this to the students that I advise, and I'll suggest it to you all. It is much easier to keep a resume current than it is to get a resume current. So as you accumulate these experiences, keep your resume updated. Additional examples for projects, presentations, technical competitions, and awards. Again, make it really easy for the reader to find them on your CV or resume, as well as the dates when they occurred, and then relevant information. Describe what it is that you may have accomplished or did. In terms of skills, for our audience, mostly technical skills like programming languages, tools, libraries, etc., as well as other relevant skills like languages spoken, etc. This is an opportunity for you to really put some context around your technical skills. And again, make it easy to spot for your readers. Assume that they're going through many resumes in one sitting. Subheadings, using bold, using spacing, describing your experience level or the type of skill that you're listing. Obviously, these will be very individual to your own experience and background. Also, your personal portfolio and activities. This is where, or you should also include links to web pages, for example, for open source or personal projects. This is where you can also include your computing outreach or volunteer work. Once again, in these examples, the headers are easy to find, they stand out, links to relevant work or information about you, like your LinkedIn page, as well as impact that the work has had. Here are a couple of examples. I want you to note the spacing, the use of headers, caps. They're easy to read, easy to identify. For example, where people's experience lied. They're consistent in terms of formatting, with plenty of white space and readable text. Generally, use one font and stick with it. People that see resumes often notice if font is not consistent. Also, links to relevant web pages and other information. That's important if someone wants to follow up with you or follow up on your work. A brief note about your online presence. Yes, you should have one. So consider a personal website, as I mentioned, a LinkedIn page, GitHub, and also personal pages give you a place to provide additional detail about you and your work. You should not be surprised if someone actually delves into your background and looks closely at what you have listed on your resume. This is where you can describe your research interests, publications, projects, your CV. So personal web pages give you an opportunity to provide links to these materials and also some personal information if you wish. It's not necessarily required, but for example, if you've traveled to different countries, if you have a specific hobby, these kinds of things can help personalize your online presence and give people a feel for who you are and what you're interested in. Also, keep in mind that committee members may conduct an online search, may review what is publicly available. So, as I'm sure you've heard before, but we'll reiterate, if there's any content on your social media that is not professional, make it private. Be sure that what you are posting online will not reflect poorly on your experiences, skills, etc. What you post online and what your online presence is a reflection of you. Now let's talk about letter writers. What's the purpose of a letter of recommendation? Well, this helps corroborate the story about you that you've told in other parts of your application through particular people's observation of you. Letter writers can address any combination of these characteristics and skills: your problem-solving ability, your creativity, your potential to engage in research, ability to work independently and in a group, ability to lead, verbal and written communication skills, your perseverance, ability to recover from missteps, ability to work hard in challenges you may face along the way. Now, we understand that no letter will cover all of these points, but it's important to keep them in mind when deciding who to ask. So, for example, one letter writer may be able to cover a group of these characteristics. For example, someone that you may have had as a professor in 1 or 2 or 3 courses, but they may not have worked with you. A supervisor, a lab supervisor, for example, can speak to some of these characteristics in ways that a professor who's only had you in class may. Your job, though, is to make sure that your letter writers provide a comprehensive view of who you are as a person and as a potential scholar. So think about that if you have alternatives and options for different letter writers, and to actually let them know what you'd like them to emphasize. When should you ask? Well, understand, and you may know this already or have this impression, that faculty are incredibly busy and are often juggling several responsibilities. So ask early. A general rule of thumb is the sooner the better, about a month in advance, which means about now, given the timeline that we have laid out at the bottom of the slide. We are here. So determine who may be a good letter of recommendation writer and begin putting materials together, like your resume, materials for your application. But it's really important to identify potential letter writers and to approach them. Ask them if they're willing to write you a letter. This is in the October-November timeframe, and then follow up with them in the November timeframe. And then December is when your letter writer, again, these general guidelines, needs to submit their letter of recommendation. So this should be happening now. How do you ask? Well, each ask can be unique to you and the person you're asking. However, there are some commonalities that an ask should have. Be very specific about deadlines. Would you be comfortable writing me a letter before whenever it's due? Also, if you were a student in an instructor's class, confirm the term, the course number, and section. For many classes, those of us who teach large classes semester after semester, we may not remember precisely what class or what term we have had you in our classes, but providing that information does a lot to jog our memories. Also, provide context and content for the letter. You might share parts of the application with them, like your resume, your statement of purpose, particularly your web presence. Again, remind them of how they know you and why you're asking them. Remind them of the work that you've done in their lab or with them. You can also offer to schedule a brief conversation to update them, to keep them current on your career and goals. And also, we professors love to hear what impact we may have had on students. So do not at all be reluctant to mention that their course, that their lab, that the work that you were involved with, even an assignment in one of their courses, have influenced your decision to pursue graduate school. Trust and believe, we love hearing that kind of thing. Now, in terms of industry writers, also provide them with guidance on what to include. And by that, we mean people you may have worked with outside of a school project. Again, remind them of when you've worked with them, what experiences that you've had, what projects you've worked on. You can also mention your personal characteristics, like working independently, your creativity, motivation, how well you communicate, your leadership. Remind them of efforts that you may have led and where you've worked on teams. This is not the place to be modest. You want to put your best foot forward. Example of a request for a letter of recommendation. Again, there's no one way to do this. However, we want to highlight a couple of specific points. In this example, there's a specific request. would you be willing to write me a strong letter of recommendation? Students may email professors all the time. I will say you can't really sneak up on us effectively. So the best thing to do is to state explicitly what it is that you need. I use an expression in my mentoring work with students. Don't make it hard for people to help you. Many times we do want to help, but we don't know exactly how and what you're approaching us about. So be specific. Also, share enough context, as I've mentioned previously. This request lays out applying to specific programs, the university name, the program and department name. This gives your potential letter writer an idea of where you're headed, and it can help them provide context and highlight the experiences that they may know will resonate with a particular school and or department. Also, as I've mentioned previously, the world is impossibly small. The person that you're asking a letter for may know people in that department, may know people at that university. And last but certainly not least, express gratitude. This letter does that. As I've mentioned, we professors enjoy hearing that we made an impact on a student, that we helped shape their thinking. So go ahead and mention that. In this letter, this person mentions, or this email, this person mentions that the work that they worked together on was incredibly formative for them, particularly adding some detail on what they did and how it helped shape their development. It's not because we need to hear that necessarily, but we don't always know when the work that we're doing with students makes an impact on them. Here's another example of an email request for a letter of recommendation. It makes a specific request. I'm emailing you to ask if you'd be willing to write a strong letter of recommendation. The deadline for the program is blank, include the date. Would be ideal if you submitted it prior. Also, sharing enough context about the programs, the deadlines, and the student materials. This message suggests that, yes, the person would be happy to meet and discuss further and welcomes any advice you may have. If this is this is going to a professor, then they most likely remember well the journey at this stage. And last but certainly not least, expressing gratitude for the person considering writing the letter. Other considerations. There are many different ways to deny a request without saying outright no. But there are some subtle cues that we all use. For example, I might not be the best fit for writing you a strong recommendation. It's important to be attentive to that. That's our way of saying, I'm not sure if I'll write you a strong letter. And no letter from me is better than a tepid letter. So please, if you get that kind of response, take it very seriously, because we're using language that essentially says you might need to look and find a strong letter from someone else. It's important to communicate with a potential letter writer, but it's important also to not be a pest. So be open and honest and let the person know that this is your timeline, that you may drop in a gentle reminder, as it says in the third bullet, prior to the due date, thanking them again. This is something that can happen, often does happen. However, emailing every other day to follow up would be overkill and not come off well. More context on selecting letter writers. Some letter writers may ask you where you're planning to apply. There are many different reasons for this. They may be curious, or they just might want to know how strong a candidate you are and where you're planning on going. Therefore, it may be helpful to keep a shareable spreadsheet, meaning something that's appropriate for others to look at, of the programs you're applying to and the status of your application. Keep in mind that as academics, we generally know how to draft and submit letters. But if you're asking a colleague or a supervisor from industry, this may be very new or unfamiliar for them. As we mentioned previously, they should know or remember you, but you may need to help them remember by stating when and under the context that you've worked together or that they may know you. You don't always have to make requests via email. You could ask them in person if you happen to be working with them in the same physical location or seeing them in a location. You might want to drop in and make the request in person. And this is also very important. They may ask you to write the first draft of your letter. There are many different good reasons for that. One, as I mentioned previously, it's your application, and your letter writers may not read the whole thing. So your letter writer may want you to emphasize which aspects of your background that you'd like for them to emphasize. That doesn't mean that you have the final draft, but certainly drafting an initial letter is quite common. And then the faculty member will typically revise it according to what they recall and what they think is best reflects your capabilities. Many faculty keep digital records. They may keep your emails. They may keep your submissions. So keep that in mind as well. If there's a particular project that you worked on, you might remind the professor of that. And of course, top performance in advanced courses is often meaningful. In general, if you have a choice to ask a letter writer from your first year of school versus your last year, in general, more advanced courses is more meaningful to a committee. So consider using technology to keep yourself organized and to manage the timeline and communications. As we were preparing for this talk in general, or this talk, our team mentioned over and over how much time it takes to put these applications together, how many different components there are to it. We're not here to scare you, but we just want to keep you prepared, or to prepare you for the task. And tracking the deadlines, tracking the contacts, tracking what's been done, how many days you have left to get it done, is really helpful. A spreadsheet, a pretty simple spreadsheet, is more than enough to track this information. We are offering this QR code so you can actually view these examples, and we encourage you to, if you wish, peruse them, take a look, and if they're helpful, go ahead and use them. It's also important to keep track of which letters have been received and which are still outstanding. That will help you determine who you need to follow up with for the general reminder. You don't want to remind someone who's already submitted a letter. Anticipating what is required. As I mentioned, applying takes time, so you should prepare. You'll need to identify where to access application portals. Typically, applications happen by or get built with a user ID and a password to create your application, and then that system may generate the request of the letter writers. Again, there's not one way that this is done, but that is a way that we have observed that schools manage their applications. You may need to create a user ID and password. There's no reason to really wait on that. You want to review what materials are necessary in order to complete the application. As we've mentioned previously, some may require GRE scores, some may not. The number of letters of recommendation can vary quite a bit. And we encourage you to upload application materials as you complete them. Do not, we repeat, do not wait until the last minute. Typically, these applications are due in December, which is the start of the holiday season. And that's a time when the semester ends and professors can be a little bit harder to reach. So you want to get started on this early, as in now. With that, I would like to field any questions that you may have.
Folks are welcome to raise their hand if they'd like to ask it out loud. We also have a Q&A function. The Q&A function should be visible at the bottom of your screen, so where you see the Zoom menu.
I have a question, Julia. I answered a couple, I think 3 questions in the Q&A. Can others see those answers?
I believe they should be able to, but I think it might make sense for us to share those aloud for folks who will be reviewing this afterwards.
Sure. So the first question was, the typical CVs are 2 pages. Is it better to keep it to 2 pages, or should I include all work even if it goes over? And my quick answer was 2 pages is definitely typical, but really there's really no length limit. And so you should feel free to include all relevant detail. As long as it's relevant, then the length of the CV is not as important. Did you want to add anything here, Charles?
No, I think that's about right. Especially where you are in your stage, that 2 pages is about right. If it's less than 1 or 3/4, then that probably looks a little bit dissimilar than what we're used to seeing. So about 2 pages is right.
I think the question was about if it's more than 2. And I think that's fine. The other question was, is it okay to get a recommendation letter from somebody from industry, like a supervisor at a company where the person is working? And here I said, yes, that's absolutely fine. In fact, that's often done. And it's good for you to assemble a set of letters that are complementary to each other, so that different letters could speak to different strengths and skills. Of course, it's fine if there is overlap, but their letters are typically looked at as a collection. So we don't expect, as Charles said in the presentation, we don't expect single letter to cover everything about you, which is why there multiple letters are requested. And so getting something from industry oftentimes can even be a plus, because it shows that you have some practical real world experience.
I see a hand raised. Is it Zoe?
Yes, I just have a follow-up with the question. So I'm just wondering, it might be a little personal, but also I feel like it could be a general question as well. Like, um, is it if you said it's good to have like a complementary or people from different field that knows about you, then in this case, would it be good if I find all of my recommenders from school, and maybe like if all of my recommenders are part of my like research collaborators or things like that, will that still be good, or would you suggest to maybe have one or two recommender that's from outside of my lab to be someone to endorse me?
So first of all, it's always good to get stronger letters than not. So if you have a more cohesive set, that's what you can get, then that's okay. But at least if you can get at least one of these is different, right? So if you get 3 letters from the same lab, probably less useful than getting one from the lab, maybe one from somebody who's taught you. And if there are a couple from the lab and then one from somebody else, that's usually better. But again, there are no hard and fast rules here.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Charles, anything to add here?
Yeah, I would just corroborate what Samir has said. You want to kind of take a step back from the application if you can, and you don't want letters to be redundant. So if 3 letter writers are from your lab and they're basically saying the same thing, then that's going to get diluted a bit. So the degree to which your letter writers can speak to your distinct experiences or characteristics, that would be better than just redundancy and having like 2 or 3 people from the same lab that are essentially going to only be able to say the same thing.
Okay. Just a really quick follow-up too. So what if all of them are like good professors in the field, but they actually work with me on a same big project? And because I like if I'm thinking of other people that I can ask for recommendation letter, it would be like instructors from class, which I don't think it may
So
not be stronger.
I
Yeah.
believe the number is a minimum. You can always submit more than the number asked. So in this case, you could get all of these big names plus others. So it doesn't have to be 3. I think for most schools, it's a minimum number. You are able to
Oh,
submit more.
okay. That's good to know. I actually didn't notice that. Yeah, thank you.
There are some quick questions in the chat related to letters of recommendation, so I'm going to take that. Does the industry supervisor need a PhD? Not necessarily. So as long as they can speak to certain skills that you will need in your PhD education, right? So for example, they could speak to your development skills that doesn't necessarily have to do with research, but you might need in the course of your PhD. If they have a PhD, that's always a plus, but they don't necessarily need to have one. And I think how can we scope? So there's another one about how can we scope out who would be the best fit. I believe Charles went through some of these in the slides, but there were some suggestions like, if you worked in a research lab or if you've done an internship, the supervisor there, if you took a course and did really well in that course, or especially if that course is directly relevant to the research area or topic that you want to do for your PhD. So for instance, the robotics example was given, right? So if you took an undergrad robotics course and you're applying for a PhD in robotics, then getting a letter from the instructor of that course could be useful. Charles, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think to the degree, I guess this was a question too, if you have the choice between a leader of a multi-million-dollar lab, an instructor for a course you took at your junior year, go with the leader of the multi-million-dollar lab. Like the prominence of the person signing the letter means a lot. So the name, the letterhead, if you will, so the letterhead as well as the person, those, if you have a choice, go with the most prominent person that is willing to write a letter for you.
There was another one about how many potential letter writers should we contact? Is there an appropriate amount? Do you want to take this, Charles?
I mean, you want to first you want to start with what's the minimum number you need for your application, and then confirm if there's an upper limit. As Samir has mentioned, usually there isn't one. So you want to amass as many strong letters as you can.
But don't go overboard, right? Not like 10.
Right.
4
10
or
would be too
maybe
much.
5 is more than enough.
Keep to single digits.
Yeah.
I also see a question about subtle cues if a professor does not think they can
Mhm.
write a recommendation letter. What are the
But can
examples?
I also
Uh-huh.
answer this real quick? So I think the other thing to also figure out is who are going to be the strongest letter writers, and not just strongest, also most relevant, right? So if you're applying for robotics and you get a letter from somebody from whom you took bioinformatics, even if that person is really famous, it may not necessarily be relevant to your application. So figuring out kind of who is really well known, important, relevant to your PhD, who will write you a strong letter writer, the strong letter, who knows you well, all of these factors go into that. And so maybe you can make a prioritized list and first ask the people who you think are going to be your strongest letter writers. And if they say no, then move down the list. I wouldn't recommend emailing like 10 people as a blast to begin with. And then what if all of them say no? Then what are you going to do? So I suggest kind of making a prioritized list, asking the top 3 first. And only if somebody says no or says something like these subtle cues where you're not really sure, then you can move to the next person. And I guess that's a good segue into the question you were about to address, Charles, about these cues.
Yeah, a cue. Generally, you want a letter writer to be enthusiastic about writing a letter. You want them to feel almost honored, like, "Oh, I'm so glad that you thought of me." So if the letter writer is given kind of a lukewarm response and not definitive with a, "Hey, I would love to write a letter. I'm looking forward to it. It's great that you're trying to pursue graduate school. I didn't realize that." That's the kind of thing that you should, I guess, expect in this context. Now, on the other hand, if they say, "Well, I'm not sure if I can right now, and why don't you ping me back around Thanksgiving?" That's a clue that that doesn't sound like enthusiasm to me. And if they're not enthusiastic, then put them on a safety list, like only if I really need them, because they're probably not going to write you a strong letter if they don't appear enthusiastic about it. And again, you know these people, you're asking them for a letter of recommendation. So keep in mind what their timeliness usually is, what their responsiveness usually is. If they're less timely and less responsive, that could be a subtle cue. It also might be that they're busy or they're on sabbatical or whatever, but try to look for, and you'll probably be able to discern it just based on the last 20 minutes or so or hour. So if you want letter writers to be enthusiastic, you want them to be really invested in a part of your journey. And that should be apparent based on your whatever reply you get and whatever subsequent conversations you may have, either electronically, in person, or via phone or video. So make sure that they're as enthusiastic as you've seen them. We all have different levels of enthusiasm that are natural to us, but just know that strong letter writers really like writing letters for students that they think they can help.
I think a couple other things. First of all, don't take it personally if somebody is less than enthusiastic or, kind of does not immediately say yes, partly because just think of I'm teaching a course right now with 154 students. Imagine if only 10% of them applied to grad school and asked me for a reference letter. That's already 15 students in my course on top of all the graduate students' PhD. So oftentimes professors just get bombarded and they're actually trying to tell you that I'm so busy that I won't do a good job. It has nothing to do with you. Uh, and you are better off with somebody who will actually spend a little bit more time on your letter. So that's one. I would also say perhaps in addition to looking for, say, negative cues, you can also look for positive cues, right? If the professor says, "Yes, I'll be delighted to write you a letter," or "Great, I'm so happy to know you're applying for this thing. Please let me know when and where," and things like that. So I think you can also infer things from a very positive and encouraging tone that they're probably going to write you a strong letter. But other cues, for instance, may be something like, "I can speak only to X, Y, and Z." What they're trying to tell you is their letter is going to be limited in what they can say about you, right? Or they may say, "Oh, I have not seen you enough for me to write a strong letter, something like that. And so those are the kinds of things you want. So they may say, I'll write you a letter, but it might be short because my interaction with you has been limited. Those are the kinds of cues you want to look for.
Yeah, and that's I'll just add briefly to that. As Samir had indicated, if it's 100 and if you're one student of 150 or 100, and if you got a good grade in the class, but you never went to office hours or you never really had a conversation with the professor, think about it from their perspective. Like, how do they even know you enough to write a strong letter? It doesn't mean necessarily that you wouldn't be a strong candidate. It's just that they don't know you. It would be like asking one of us to write you a letter, almost. Like we don't know you. So how can we possibly write a strong letter?
So another question, by the way, so there were some questions about statement of purpose. We are going to have another session that will get deeper into statement of purpose and how you connect the research area and develop that into a statement of purpose. So I encourage you to attend that. But the other question that is not about that was, how important are giving talks, presenting your research? Does having scholarships, grants improve your candidacy?
I would say yes. Yes. I mean, is it critical that you are necessary? No, but it certainly helps. So look for opportunities where you can present the work or be on a poster or be on a presentation. We understand that at your stage, you're probably not doing single authored things. And most of the work we do is in teams anyway. So if you're on a project enough for authorship or enough of helping with a presentation, that says a lot. That signals a lot to us about your involvement in it.
I think a couple of points I will add is you may also want to think a little bit in detail about what kind of things can go on there. So for example, if you've been part of a summer research program or a regular term research program at your university, oftentimes they have these end of the term symposium, poster symposium. It is local, it's not published to the world, but having a poster presented during that, that's not something every undergraduate has. And so those are the kinds of things that you can list under presentations, right? You may not, you wouldn't necessarily call it publication, but you can say poster presentations and add those local presentations. Same with awards, right? If you got a travel stipend to go to a conference, that is also, yes, it's a small dollar amount award, but those are the kinds of things that set you apart because not everybody would have that. And of course, if you have some kind of a scholarship, yes, you can list there. None of these things are required, but they're all part of what might boost your candidacy, what sets you apart from other applicants. But if you don't have them, that doesn't mean there aren't other things that can set you apart, because we look at all of these things as a package, which is why this presentation was going through multiple pieces of it, right? So your statement, your CV, your transcripts, your in general other information that you provide your letter writers, what they say, all of that is looked at as a package, and different people have different experiences and different skill sets that they bring. And so you want to emphasize what it is that is unique about you and what are your specific strengths and how they connect to the research area, how they connect to the school or the professor that you want to work with. Is it okay to ask a PhD student who you work with very closely for a long time to write a letter of recommendation? I don't think there's any rules against that. It's a bit unusual, but it does happen. So there's no rules prohibiting that. If that's like your last resort, sure, that would be fine, I suppose. Charles?
Yeah,
I have
I'll
seen
corroborate that.
the
Just assume that the readers of your application are assuming that the letters that you have submitted are the best letters you could get.
Mhm.
So if an instructor who's a PhD student had you in a lab session and you got along great with them and they seemed really engaged in your work, if you're going to submit 4 letters, make sure that that one is a top 4 in terms of the criteria that we've described. And if so, fine. But if not, if there's a professor who might have their own lab and who may be a little more prominent, then that person speaking to your capabilities would be viewed at more positively.
So we are
Okay.
past time, and I'm not seeing any other questions or big questions that we haven't answered.
Okay, then
We want
let's,
to, Julia is gonna do the ending, right?
Julie, you want to
Absolutely.
wrap up? Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, for highlighting your personal experiences and interests. We hope that you'll join us not next week, but the week after on October 9th for finding the programs that are right for you. You are all registered for the session, so we hope to see you there. If you have any friends who would like to join us, they can use that QR code to join these sessions as well. Charles, do you mind going to the next slide? In addition to this series on how to apply to graduate school, we also offer another series about computing research engagement and awareness. If you're interested in speaking to other undergraduate researchers about research, we encourage and invite you to join us for Ask Me Anything About Research, which will happen on October 21st. You do need to register for these sessions, and you can find that registration link on our website, so cra.org/uartphd. I'll also be following up via email with some links. Beyond those 2 workshop series, we also ask you to complete our survey. This survey will help us make these sessions tailored to you and your needs. If we can ever be doing anything better to help support you, this is the place where you'll want to leave that feedback. You're also welcome to reach out directly to our team. So if you don't want to write it anonymously, you can also just let us know. But this will populate automatically when the session ends, so we highly, highly, highly encourage you to complete that short survey. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure to see you all, and we're really excited and happy to have your active participation.
Thank you.